morning, everyone. Great. It's nice to see all of you, and a warm welcome to this conference 2011 International Symposium of Engineers Without Borders USA. Again, it's nice and rewarding to see so many people today, and I can feel the enthusiasm. If there's one thing about EWB conferences, it's not if you are depressed, come to an EWB conference and then you'll get fired up for the rest of your life. And it's, again, want to thank all of you for being here today. What I want to talk about today is creating transformative leaders and the role of Engineers Without Borders in creating leadership. I think that if you look at Engineers Without Borders and what makes Engineers Without Borders great is the people, the staff, the directors of Engineers Without Borders, the sponsors, and also the communities we are working with. Leadership to me is many things, and it obviously many things to different people. But for me, if you want to be part of Engineers Without Borders, you need to be a leader. You need to be compassionate. You need to be espousing collaboration. You need to be espousing humility, integrity, ingenuity, and so on and so forth. Before I talk about what is leadership within the context of Engineers Without Borders, I want to go back to pretty much the origin of Engineers Without Borders and bring it into the context of the first project that I put together, again by accident, in about 11 years ago. So if I can have, I can move the slides there. All right, so this project really started in Belize. You probably heard about it. If you have not heard about it, well, you're going to be surprised. If you heard about it, well, I'm sorry to repeat it again, but I think it will give you the context in which it started, and that could be the place for me to tell you how leadership is so critical. It again started in my backyard in 1997. Had some people from Belize who came, worked in landscaping, and 2 years later, they told me about the needs in Belize with Mayan Indians. And 2 years later, they sent me an email and say, hey, I was in your backyard 2 years ago. You mentioned you could help, and can you come over? So in 2000, April of 2000, pretty much 11 years ago, I went to Belize and explored some communities there, a Mayan village, 250 people. And what really changed my life was that little girl there in the left corner of the slide there. Her job was to carry water from the river to the village back and forth. As a result, she could not go to school. So they asked me, hey, you're a civil engineer, why don't you come up with a pumping system? Obviously, at the middle of the village, at the middle of the jungle of Belize, there's no electricity. People could not afford this kind of fuel, and we had to come up with a solution tapping into a waterfall with the potential energy and designing a pump. Well, students got really excited about it, and what I learned from this project is how students can really be excited about it. Like, I teach a class this semester called Dynamics to 96 students, and believe me, it's not the most exciting class on this planet. If you have ever taken dynamics or thermomechanics or thermodynamics and all those things that students have to take, well, it's not exciting. Well, that was really exciting to the students. And what I learned from the students are a few things. They told me, well, you know, we are excited about it because this is a meaningful type of engineering. How often do you have meaningful education in engineering education today? I said this kind of work was meaningful because it brought essentially communities into the context of what they learned in the classroom. They were also excited in terms of doing some real work, and they wanted more and more and more and more and more of it. So that's how Engineers Without Borders was essentially created by a handful of students who wanted to change the world essentially in 2000 and 2001. And as we can tell, it has been a very successful type of enterprise thanks to you guys, thanks to the professional members, thanks to the sponsors, thanks to the board that we have had over the past 10 years. For me, what I realized in starting that first project was, who is addressing the engineering for the other 90%? Think about it. The engineering profession has been excellent at addressing the needs of 1 billion people on this planet. 1 billion rich people. What about the other 5 billion people whose job is to try to stay alive by the end of the day? Who is addressing their needs? Where is the role? What is the role of the engineering profession? Where is the engineering profession in addressing those needs? Yes, the fundamentals are the same as for the 1 billion rich people on the planet, but you all know that the implementation of engineering is quite different in a small community in the middle of Africa, or in the middle of Afghanistan, or middle of Iran, or what have you there. It's quite different. So where do we learn this kind of engineering for the developing world? Well, until essentially recently, we did not have programs in the United States that addressed that. Most professional organizations did not address that. So essentially, Engineers Without Borders came at the right time, at the right place. And we are essentially the right people in changing the dialogue, the discussion in engineering education and engineering practice. What are those best practices for the developing world? What are the best practices not only in development, but also in periods of crisis? I'm getting more and more involved in the field of crisis, relief, recovery, and development. Imagine 2 hours after being in Haiti, what kind of engineering are you going to practice 2 hours after an earthquake? What kind of engineering are you going to practice a month after an earthquake, 6 months after an earthquake, a year after an earthquake? I can tell you that the best practices are going to change as you move along on that continuum of intervention. What's the role of engineers in addressing those needs? Most of my work right now, I'm focusing more and more on relief work and recovery work. Engineers Without Borders is more in the field of recovery, late recovery to development. But there are some interesting questions that we need to raise, and implementation that we need to, engineering practices that we need to develop in addressing, for instance, engineering in emergency, or engineering in high altitudes or very difficult conditions. Believe me, I'm doing some work in Peru at 14,000 feet, 15,000 feet. I've done some work in Afghanistan in very difficult conditions there. The kind of engineering there is quite different from, say, doing engineering in a small village in Africa. So what about engineering in very difficult conditions? So why engineering for the developing world? Well, you all know that the statistics, and you have all have heard about the statistics. These are statistics, but they are made out of people like you and me. Again, 5 billion people whose job is to try to stay alive by the end of the day. My good friend, Andy Yeager from the UN, one time gave us some statistics. He said, like on a given day, there are about 5,000 people die from indoor air pollution, 5,000 people die from water and sanitation problems, 5,000 people die from malaria, 5,000 people die from TB, and 5,000 people die from HIV/AIDS. That's about 25,000 people every day who die for reasons that are purely preventable. Now, you multiply that by 7, that gives you about 200,000 people who die every week, and that's essentially equivalent to 1 tsunami a week, or 1 earthquake, 1 Haiti earthquake a week of people who die for reasons that are purely preventable. Frankly, my friends, this is not acceptable, period. We, as engineers, we have an obligation, and it's no longer an option for us, to address the needs of the developing world and addressing the statistics that do not essentially reflect highly on the intelligence or the lack of intelligence of the human species. Now, if you look at the mission of Engineers Without Borders, having said those statistics, and at least creating the context in which the work we are doing is being done, our mission is really twofold when you look at it. One mission is to create secure and stable communities and to work in partnership with those communities, and one could spend obviously a lot of time in discussing what that means. And it means different things to different people, especially in the field of international development. But to me, creating secure and stable communities is to provide the resources and the knowledge necessary for people to solve their own problems. Not the way I look at it, but in partnership with those communities. Another component of our mission of Engineers Without Borders is to create a new generation of engineers for the 21st century. I'm not talking about the nerdy engineers of the past 200 years. I'm talking about engineers like you guys, pumped up to make the world a better place. I was talking to a colleague there about half an hour ago, saying that, hey, most of you who are 20 years old, you have been on this planet for 20 years old, and for 20 years, and you've probably heard of war for about half of that lifetime, and you probably heard of global climate change and global issues. No wonder you are interested in making the world a better place, and I applaud you and commend you for this desire to make the world a better place. It is my role as a university professor to do that. I can tell you that engineering education makes no sense anymore. It is completely disconnected with the real world. It is completely disconnected with the needs of the world, and it's completely disconnected with what the students want. in engineering education. And it is time to reinvent engineering education and to re-engineer engineering education. And I think EWB is about that too. It's about creating a new generation of citizen engineers, global engineers, who can think across disciplines, who are facilitators of sustainable development, social and economic change, capacity building, and appropriate technology. I see engineers also as peacemakers. I'm getting involved with the NAE, National Academy of Engineering, in an initiative that with the US Institute of Peace. And next week I'll be in DC to help shape the agenda of the May 17th meeting. In that May 17th meeting, the question that is going to be asked is, what is the role of science and technology and engineering in peacemaking? Wow, that's fantastic. Think about it. We have been talking about peacemaking all along for the past, at least I've been on this planet for 57 years. They've heard of peacemaking for the past 57 years, and they have not done a great job about it. Well, maybe it's time for the engineering profession to do something about it. Right? We have always been at the bottom of the food chain. Maybe it is time for us to go up the food chain and show some changes on the planet. Getting involved in a project with EWB-USA, EWB-Israel, and EWB-Palestine about a project called the Kidron River Project that runs from East Jerusalem to the Dead Sea. Half of that river, which is essentially a river of waste, because no waste is being treated east of Jerusalem, half of it goes through Israeli land, and half of it goes through essentially Palestinian land. Well, water is without borders. Pollution is without borders. Stupidity is without borders too, by the way. And intelligence is also without borders. Creativity is without borders. Leadership is without borders. Ingenuity is without borders. Compassion is without borders. And that's the fuel that is really driving, in my opinion, the work that we are doing with Engineers Without Borders. Compassion. Compassion in action. What is compassion? Is to have passion with. Passion with ourselves, passion with the people we don't necessarily like, passion with the people that we like, passion with the earth, passion with the environment, passion with the people, passion with the culture, passion with the entire planet. That's what Engineers Without Borders is about. And when you are passionate, you cannot not be a leader. When you are passionate, you want change. And what's our fuel? You think that it's your cup of coffee this morning. I can tell you it's the passion. And this room is full of passion. You can sense it. It's almost solid in this room. I don't know if you feel about it. So that's the passion. That's what has driven Engineers Without Borders over the past, in my opinion, past 10 years. Not only here in the United States, we have a representative from Canada. The same thing is in Canada. We have seen it also in Engineers Without Borders International Network, where we have about 50 countries in the world there in that network. And I've traveled in many of those places. I can tell you, it's the same passion, this idea to make the world a better place, one community at a time, and by empowering the communities of the world.